I remember that.
He put this old candle wax. He melted it into the French fry oil and put it in this fucking mason jar and put it under a light bulb and was trying to get it to work like a lava lamp. And then we all got mad and he threw it on some girl from the neighborhood. At one point he was going to pretend he was mentally retarded so he could get a free high school diploma and go to the retarded class.
Yeah, I remember.
And he was sure that would be an easy way to get through high school and not have to do anything but grunt and moan. That never came to fruition.
Yeah.
After a succession of dead-end jobs, it became obvious that there were few opportunities around that fitted in with Kurt and his lifestyle. There was, however, a local Aberdeen-based band, the Melvins, who inspired Kurt and his friends enormously.
The Melvins' influence was huge. Buzz Osborne, not for just Kurt, but for anybody that wanted anything to do with music in a sort of punk rock underground sort of level, not just in Grays Harbor, but in Seattle as well. Buzz Osborne's been a sort of a daunting shadow to live under, and it probably affected nobody more than Kurt Cobain.
I remember the first time the Melvins went on a national tour. We were bored as hell. We didn't have anyone to hang around with. There was because it was like a ritual to go to band practice. Kurt and me and a few other people were allowed to actually sit in the room with them and totally deafen ourselves listening to the Melvins. And one afternoon, Pig and Kurt and I were taking acid. And Kurt said, well, we should just go and bullshit our way into Krover's house and we'll jam. And Pig played a little guitar. At the time, I didn't play anything. And Kurt walked to the front door and pounded on the door, and Dale's dad came out. And he was known to have a few. And he was really drunk. And Kurt said, we're the band, we got to jam. And he just moved out of the way and led us back into the back room.
He was an old dude.
We went back there and I played drums and Kurt played guitar and Pig screamed obscenities.
Yeah.
And we taped them all over Krover's Jimi Hendrix tapes. We filled them full of this horrendous noise. And I remember Krover got back from tour and he was like really pissed at us. Who did that?
And Kurt wanted really nothing more than to be a member of the Melvins when he was growing up. And he was never offered that job, so he ended up creating his own band that was, more Melvin-esque maybe than the Melvins themselves.
He tried out for the Melvins and totally lost it and couldn't do anything. And
yeah, choked.
Yeah.
But he got together with Novi, and Novi in high school, God, was just a one-man entertainment show.
No Such was the class clown that was older.
He was real
He
tall.
ran for student body vice president at one point, and I remember my sister saying, "Stay away from that guy. He ate rhododendrons."
Well, Kurt had met Chris Novoselic in high school, and so they met when Kurt was about 15 or so. Chris was 1 year older. They really didn't become friends until Kurt had dropped out of high school. Novoselic had graduated. He always sort of jokingly said later that he managed a lot of the band's finances because he was the only one with a high school education, which is true. So they became fast friends, probably in about 1986 or so. Their friendship really began to blossom. The band began in about 87, 88. It's still hard to know when the genesis of it actually is.
Novoselic was Kurt's oldest friend, and his bass playing, while it's not, he's not a virtuoso on the bass, but he is very musical in a way that reminded me, an old fart from the Boomer era, of Paul McCartney.
Well, at first they jam above Chris's mom's hair salon.
Yeah.
And it would just be party time. And Kurt would play the drums sometimes, and they'd play a half-assed version of Hey, Hey, We're the Monkees with Chris on guitar and Kurt playing drums. And then they were trying to find a drummer.
Novoselic, brought in a number of the other players of the band. Kurt also knew Chad Channing, the original drummer. Aaron Burkhart was a neighbor. So people were sort of in and out of the band at that point.
For a while, Greg Hokinson played bass, and they were called Fecal Matter, with Crover on the drums. And then they went to Seattle to Kurt's aunt's house to record a 4-track demo. And they decided that Hokinson was a misogynistic, racist, redneck hick, and so Kurt played the bass too on that. And that tape's still, there's a copy of it somewhere.
In 1987, a friend of the band, Ryan Agner, was instrumental in helping the band towards their first steps towards stardom. The band used to practice and eat at Ryan's house, and unlike the rest of the band, he held down a stable job.
And I would come by Chris and Shelley's house on my way home from work, and one day Chris says, hey, Kurt and I have got this band together. So we went to this little house over on the east side of Aberdeen. So anyway, we wandered on in, and it was pretty scary, borrowed equipment and all sort of set up in this living room, and we started playing. And it was good from the beginning. Kurt rarely worked and had little money, and so before too long we got to be friends and whatnot, and I worked, and I was comfortable, and I would cook and eat well, and so I'd invite him over for dinner, and of course then we'd talk more about music. Kurt felt that that there wasn't a lot of new territory to be discovered with music, particularly for himself, because he had made probably what he considered to be a relatively thorough study of music for our age. He was more interested in the melody, and the way its counterpoint with the rest of the song, how it worked, the grand scheme, the total package. That's what he was delivering. Did it rock? Did it get you the hook?
More oxygen, more oxygen, more oxygen.
The band carried on developing their underground punk style, and for the first time seriously considered playing to an audience. In 1987, Ryan got the band their first gig by suggesting they play at a small party thrown by his friends Tony Percula and Jeff Forrest. The now legendary performance took place in the front room of Tony and Jeff's house in the nearby small town of Raymond.
And I ran into Tony one day, and I said, you know, there's these dudes that I discovered, this band, and they're cool, man. They got this stuff going on, and you guys jam once in a while down here, don't you? You know, Friday night party, you know, strike up the band, that kind of thing. He's like, yeah, we do that. And I said, well, we ought to get these guys to come down, because the way it played in my head was,